We are up to letter number 29. Now, in the previous couple of letters, spoke about the quality of a tzaddik after their passing. This letter speaks about the special revelation of godliness or access to kedusha, to holiness, to godliness, that is made available when we fulfill mitzvahs. We're going to begin with a couple of quotes, as we often do, to sort of give us a framework. And we're going to really focus on the distinctive quality of the halacha, the absolute sort of cold, dry application of the rules, which is sometimes less dazzling than the in-depth analysis, what is called pilpul, which literally translates as a pepper, but that sort of sharp-minded discussion and back and forth and so on. And it's a classic illustration of the idea that lowest, that is most tangible, contains the highest within it. The letter is also going to discuss a comment from the Arizal, Rabbi Zakluria, about the idea that every neshama has to return until it fulfills all 613 mitzvahs in order for it to be clothed, to have all of the full garments, which will allow the neshama to interface and to absorb the godliness. Otherwise, that would be overwhelmingly beyond the person. Now, curiously, in the Shulchan Aruch, which the Alter Rebbe wrote, he has a whole section called, specifically, like almost a separate booklet, on the laws of Torah study. And in chapter 2, law 1, he writes about this idea from the halachic perspective, that everyone must fulfill all 613 mitzvahs. And it's noteworthy that the term he uses there is that one must fulfill all 613 mitzvahs in action, speech, and thought. Now, we're familiar with those three phrases. Here in Tanya, we're going to see that the Alter Rebbe quotes the same idea and says that a person must fulfill all 613 mitzvahs in thought, speech, and action. So in the code of Jewish law, the Alter Rebbe puts action first, then speech, then thought. Here in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe writes thought first, then speech, then action, which of course raises the question, why? And the answer is the context. The Shulchan Aruch deals with what do you have to do? Stand up, sit down, eat this, don't eat that, et cetera, et cetera. So its primary focus is on the action, and therefore action is mentioned first. Tanya, which deals with what we call Pnimius HaTorah, the essence of Torah, digs down to a more personalized, profound, what we call a deeper level. And in that deeper level, we talk about thought first. And that's why in Tanya, when the Alter Rebbe mentions the three garments, he puts the term thought first. Another important term, two terms that we're going to be talking about, that it's good to really understand them and have a full grasp so that when we encounter them, we understand their meaning. They're two sides of a similar dynamic. One is called tainug. Tainug, if you put it translate into the dictionary, it translates as pleasure. But pleasure, again, maybe it's just me, but pleasure is a little bit of a shallow word in English.
Yeah.
Pleasure tends to mean cookies or fancy things or whatever it is, because we're fortunate that we don't have to think about the true pleasure of life, which is to be alive. That's the most basic pleasure of life in the physical sense. Well, in the spiritual sense, the most profound idea of pleasure is to be in alignment with Hashem. So I like the word alignment, if you can think of a different word, because maybe it's just me, but the word pleasure suggests to me something that's going to be pretty shallow and not all that deep. And it's a transient form of temporary sensory stimulation. So when we use the word pleasure, we mean in alignment. It's not just something that's an extra, that's a luxury item. And then there's the word rutzain. Rutzain, the root of that is the word to run, rutz. What do we run after? What is it that we pursue? What is it that we are engaged in behavior to attempt to acquire? Rutzain is the action side of tainug. We have a rule of thumb that a person only acts on something that is driven from within them, even if it's some sort of dismissive activity, some sort of trivial misbehavior. It is driven by this essential core idea, or this essential core character trait. That's a deeper term that exists within the person, that he is driven by this pursuit of alignment with himself, and the manifestation is his ratzon. That is what he wants in behavior. So here we go. Oh, so I'm sorry, to add one note to that. So when we say that the mitzvahs are Hashem's ratzon, we mean that they are the expression, they are the interest of that which is deepest in his essence, that which is most profoundly of his oineg, of his alignment. So they're not just busy work, and they're not just for our sake. Yes, we recognize that the mitzvahs are things that are helpful for us, but they're not just for the value of how they make the world a better place. They are for the aspect of the expression of the infinity of Hashem. Like we talked, remember, in the Iggeres Tshuva, where tshuva is about being in alignment, and the hay is sometimes taken out there, and we need to drag it back to be in this perfect kind of smooth top to bottom alignment of the infinity of Hashem. So the Alter Rebbe begins with a quote, Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. The woman of valor is the crown of her husband. Now the crown sits on top of the head. This metaphor of the crown, commonly we use the word keser, but here we use the word ateres, is a reference to that which evokes a quality from within the person. That is, the purpose of the king's crown is not simply to be headgear, to keep his head warm. The purpose of the crown is to elicit a character trait that is otherwise latent within the person. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, because the crown is a sense of obligation. The crown is the sense that he has to rise up to that level. There is a certain form of, just certain, there is a burden upon the king. The crown is the embodiment of his family, of his country, his history, his identity. This is the character of his crown. It's contained within the crown, and it sits on top of the head to elicit this quality. Now, the analogy or the metaphor is going to be for the oral Torah and the written Torah. As we are familiar, there is no concept that is completely detailed in the Torah Shebichsav. The classic examples, it tells us on Sukkot to take a beautiful fruit, but it doesn't say what that beautiful fruit is. That's transmitted orally to be the esrog. The whole concept of establishing a calendar is oral. It says to write it on your doorposts. The concept of mezuzah, the way we understand it as a scroll and so on, is part of oral Torah. In the Torah itself, it makes reference to the oral Torah. The specific example is in Parshas Re'eh, where it speaks about the laws of shchita, of slaughtering animals for food as opposed to for sacrifices. And Hashem says that you should do it in the manner in which I have shown you. And yet, if you look through the entire Tanakh, you will not find even one reference to the process of shchita. So, ironically, most or whatever, I don't know how to put a number on it, of what we are familiar with, maybe everything that we are familiar with in Torah observance, is transmitted only through the oral law and not explicitly in the written law. Again, time and time again, even with what a shofar is, that we use the ram's horn and the notes, etc., even that we fast on Yom Kippur. There's nowhere in Torah that it says, thou shalt not eat on Yom Kippur. It says you should ta'anuas nafshoseichem. The most literal translation of that is to deprive yourself. But deprive yourself of what? And again, this is part of oral Torah. Now, the idea being that the marital relationship becomes the primary analogy, that just as the wife is the crown of her husband, that is, she elicits that which the husband contributes and gives it nuance and depth and full development, so too the Torah Sheba'al Peh gives full development to the Torah Shebichsav. Remember the analogy, the man brings home the wheat and the wife turns the wheat into bread. This is a metaphor, analogy for the act of conception, that the husband's contribution is undeveloped and it becomes developed within the wife. Similarly, Torah Shebichsav is undeveloped and it becomes nuanced, detailed, given body and meaning and instruction exclusively through the Torah Sheba'al Peh, through the oral Torah. So the Alter Rebbe says, Isi Gemara Perak Daled de Megillah. The Gemara tells us the Shtamish B'Toga Cholef. You may recognize this because it's also quoted in Pirkei Avos. It says that if one uses Torah as a crown, it will be lost. What does this mean? This means that he utilizes, that is, for selfish gain, for personal gain, rather than to be in awe of the kedusha, the godliness that is being developed by it, from one who studies the halacha, which is the keser, the crown of Torah. Now, the Alter Rebbe doesn't make this mention here, but there is a quote, many are probably familiar with it, that describes the disputes between the house of Hillel and the school of Shammai, where they go back and forth and they say, well, who's right? And the descriptive answer is, Elu v'elu divrei Elokim chayim. Both the words of Hillel and Shammai are the words of the living God. But there it uses specifically the word Elokim. And Elokim, of course, the first introduction we have in Torah to Hashem is as Elokim, Bereshis bara Elokim. In the beginning, Elokim creates heaven and earth, Shemayim va'aretz. So Elokim represents an expression of God within this physical world. And then the quote goes on to say, Dvar Hashem, what though is the word of Hashem? And there it uses the four-letter name of Hashem, the letter that supersedes this physical creative world, the level of godliness where there is no distinction between past, present, and future, the most basic elements of creation, Bereshis, time, the concept of time. And the answer is, what is the word of Havaya? That is halacha. So the instructional, which again is sometimes, I don't want to be disrespectful, it's like boring, oh, okay, stop at the stop sign. The discussion, the debate, the philosophical, that's where the enthusiasm is. And then you got to make a decision. Okay, so we're making a right turn or left turn. Where are we going to eat? This kind of thing, this sort of classic, we can discuss it for hours. And then at some point, we got to make a decision. Okay, where are we going for supper? So here the Alter Rebbe continues, and he says, Tana deveilio, kol shein halacha is muftach kulu. And again, you may recognize this. It's at the end of the morning davening. The house of Elio asked the question, or makes the statement, who is, it's sort of a question-answer style. It says, what is considered somebody who has the world to come is a person who studies halacha every day. And again, the question is going to be, why is it about studying halacha? There's so many areas of Torah. You can study the narratives of the prophets. You can study the debates of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Why is it specifically that studying the cold, hard steel rules assures a person of the world to come? Well, there is a very sort of tangible, immediate answer, because then you'll do the stuff that you need to do. You'll make sure to follow the rules. And if you follow the rules, you will accumulate the mitzvah alignment with Hashem, and thus you'll be assured of a place in the world to come. That's the sort of immediate answer. However, that answer is a little disappointing, or it falls short, because we might just go right to the end. It's not about the study of halacha, it's about the execution of the halacha. Meaning, if we're saying that the study of halacha is what assures a person a place in the world to come, because that is likely to prompt him to fulfill the halachas. So then just say that. Just say, when you fulfill the halachas. It's not the study. It's not about studying about making brachas. It's about making brachas. It's not studying about shaking the lulav. It's about shaking the lulav. Ipso facto, we're back to our original question. What is it about studying halacha that is distinctive, especially when the halacha can sometimes feel less dynamic, less, I'll use the childish word, exciting, than the intricate debates back and forth that can potentially get us to such a level of halakhic determination. Now, the Alter Rebbe here explains, or starts to explain, why we refer to halacha as the crown. Yes, Beth, you wanted to ask something? You had to unmute.
Yes, thank you. So the concept you said about Breshit, I have a question. It's a little off what we're discussing now. Can I still ask it, or it's
Well,
okay?
let's try to stick to the topic, and maybe we can
Okay,
discuss it at a different time. Okay,
understood.
so I'm
Sure.
the only one allowed to go off on tangents here.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay. So these two quotes that describe halacha as the crown and describe the study of halacha as the entryway into the world to come are sequential quotes in the Talmud, which again is the suggestion that there's something that connects this idea that halacha is referred to as the crown, and that halacha is the assurance to the entrance in the world to come. And this is becomes another little bit, a bit of a hint or a nudge to us to understand what this distinctive value of halacha study is. And again, the immediate response, or the immediate presumption that it's somehow a reference to the execution of the halacha, is what we're sort of going past that, because the emphasis is on the study of the halacha, not the execution. That really becomes the point of the question. But so now our question is, here we go. Lama nikru halachas b'shem taga b'kisro shel Torah. Why is halacha referred to with this term as the crown? Again, every word is precise. It's not just a sort of guess. Why is it referred to that way? V'gam lama hashen halacha is dafka. And why is it specifically the study of halacha that assures the person in the world to come, more than the study of the prophets, the analysis of the Mishnah, the history, the Medrash? Torah is vast. What's the cause effect of the study of halacha to bring a person to Olam Haba? It's not just that we want to give it the biggest word that we have, so we say it'll go to Olam Haba. But we want to give it the biggest word we have, so we call it a crown. What is it? Something that there's a direct, I'm calling it a cause effect. Why not other parts of Torah? Another example about the distinctive quality of the study of halacha is found in the Gemara in a Masechta that's called Menachos. Menachos has to do with the offerings in the temple, but there it says Afilo shan adam ala perek echad shachris chulu yatsi lechavasai. So we know that the study of Torah is a mitzvah, and mitzvahs have rules. They're not just general directives. There's real specific rules, and especially when it comes to Torah study, where there is a bracha that we can make for Torah study. We say it every morning. We've incorporated it in our morning davening, al divrei, the bracha, al divrei Torah, and that's one of the reasons why we have some Torah study right there in the very first pages of the morning davening. We talk about a Mishnah, we talk about some Chumash, and so on, because we want to make sure to check that box. That's the way we've structured it, so that we're covered and we won't miss that mitzvah. But here we find a different statement, or a complementary statement, that if a person only studies one section, one chapter of halacha in the morning, he has fulfilled his mitzvah of Torah study. again, there's always infinite opportunity, but there is a floor, even if there's no ceiling, for the mitzvah of Torah study. And the question again is put back, why specifically the study of halacha? Why is this so emphasized more than all the other areas of Torah? Torah is vast. If all the skies were parchments and all the trees were pens, we could not write the words of Hashem. Okay. So now that we sort of stirred up that question, now we're going to give it an answer. But again, our answer, because we're studying Tanya here and not the halacha, is not just another directive, but something of a more profound or personal characteristic. We have this rule taught to us by the Arizal that everybody has to fulfill all 613 mitzvahs. Now, it doesn't say this here in Tanya, but we have an allusion to this way back in the book of Bereshis. You probably recognize this story, that when Yaakov Avinu and his family finally decide that it's safe to leave Lavan, they have to go out and confront Esav. So Yaakov Avinu dispatches messengers to Esav with a series of gifts and also an implication that Yaakov is not to be messed with. He is to be feared, which Esav would understand. Esav, having grown up in the household of Yitzchak and Rivka, understands the power of Hashem's protection. And Esav, being who he was, would be reasonable to assume that spending 20 years with Lavan has depleted Yaakov's spiritual standing and thus has depleted his divine protection. So Yaakov sends a message to Esav with the words, Im Lavan garti, which translates as, with Lavan I dwelt. Now, it's a little bit of an odd phrase, dwelt, garti, which catches the attention of the commentaries. And some explain that Yaakov is saying to Esav, look, I just dwelt with Lavan. I didn't become like Lavan. So lest you think, which would not be an unreasonable presumption, that I have somehow forfeited my divine favor, know ye, buddy, that I only dwelt with Lavan. I didn't become Lavanized. I didn't become entrenched in the character of Lavan. And then we have a little bit of a more poetic interpretation that he says Garti, which Garti, if you do the math, is the numerical equivalent of 613. And it's memorable in a little bit of a poetic Im Lavan Garti Taryag Mitzvah Shamarti. This concept is quoted even by Rashi, which means it makes its way down into the narrative story. And Esav, again, would understand this, having grown up in the house of Yitzchak and Rivka. He would understand this type of poetry and allusion and what it means that I am still protected by Hashem. We thus raise the question, what does that even mean? Im Lavan Garti Taryag Mitzvah Shamarti. Nobody can do all 613 mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs for Kohanim, there are mitzvahs for a king, there are mitzvahs that apply in Israel, there are mitzvahs that apply under certain circumstances, there are opportunity mitzvahs, and so on. Not even to talk about the mitzvahs that are commemorative of events which hadn't even occurred at this point. Yaakov is long before we left Egypt, so what is he eating matzah for? And so on and so forth. Okay, but we understand that there is a spiritual characteristic to these mitzvahs and that he was able to fulfill them, as the Gemara tells us. And again, this means it makes its way all the way down, even into the narrative part of Torah, that our forefathers observed all the mitzvahs, even the rabbinic mitzvahs. So why are they lighting Hanukkah candles? We haven't even had the story of Hanukkah. And we understand this to mean that on the 25th of Kislev, from the innate creation, that's the first day of Hanukkah, it is somehow built in to the ecosystem of the world that we are able to connect with Hashem through lighting the menorah, which we didn't know until the story happened. And we have evidence of this, where Abraham's nephew Lot, eats matzah. We haven't even gone to Egypt, let alone left in such a hurry. We didn't have time for the bread to rise. But it's innate in the setup of creation, only to be revealed later, not to be created, but to be revealed. But again, this idea that I fulfilled all 613 mitzvahs. No one person can do all 613 mitzvahs because the mitzvahs are opportunity mitzvahs, and you can't be everything. You can't be the Kohen and the king, and this circumstance that occurs if you happen upon, and so what if you don't find any lost objects? So you have no opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah of returning lost objects, etc. Things that happen in the Beis Hamikdash and so on. So what we can deduce from this is that when Yaakov tells Esav that he fulfilled all 613 mitzvahs, he is not referencing physical execution of all of those mitzvahs. He is rather executing or is describing the fulfillment of the concepts of all 613 mitzvahs, as we will explore. So he says, so the Arizal said that the goal or the necessity of fulfilling all of these mitzvahs is so that we will be properly garmented, properly clothed, in order to receive this gift from Hashem. As we know, nothing ventured, nothing gained, no deposit, no return. That if a person says, well, I didn't have a meaningful spiritual experience, we could say to them, well, what did you invest? I mean, what preparation did you? What do you mean? I showed up. I went and it was boring. Well, what were they doing? I don't know. Well, why didn't you know? Well, how am I supposed to know? Well, if you went into a lecture and you hadn't read the book before, when you hadn't familiarized yourself, should you be surprised that it was not a meaningful experience? So we've got to ready ourselves, and this is in part what the garments do. Without the garments, a person could be overwhelmed, like they walked into, advanced trigonometry, and they don't even know basic math, so they're overwhelmed. So too, a person is overwhelmed by godliness, like our ancestors were at Sinai, or underwhelmed. I don't get it. What's the big deal? I went in, so they're talking a bunch of stuff. It made no sense to me. I dismiss it as nonsense. And so the Arizal says that by doing each of the mitzvahs, we are able to thus absorb and be aligned with the expression of godliness in the world to come. But then we ask the question, Lavad mitzvah satluyis b'melech shu mitzvah kol Yisrael ki kolos kulam. And then we say, but what about, for example, the mitzvahs of the king? So not everyone can be the king. Now, this is true that not everyone can be the Kohen Gadol. So why does the Alter Rebbe not mention that? And we explain because the distinctive aspect of the king, and again, in contrast to, for example, other mitzvahs that are positional for people of certain communal appointments, such as the high priest, is that the role of the king is to be the community. So the mitzvahs of the Kohen Gadol, for example, can be fulfilled in machshava, in thought. But the mitzvah of the king, we are fulfilled, or we are enriched by when we are aligned with the king. And again, just to take the king idea, because it's going to become developed here, it's a hard thing for us in the West to imagine. There's a letter from the Rebbe before Rosh Hashanah that the Rebbe would often send these communal letters. And the Rebbe talks about the difficulty of understanding the idea of Hashem as king, because we don't have kings, and the kings that we've had in recent memory were not such nice people. They were self-serving, they were arrogant, they were silver spoon spoiled, and self-indulgent, and so on. But the true concept of a king is that he is unified with his people. He's absolutely aligned with his people, and thus his actions and their actions are one. Now, to borrow a phrase from literature, they used to refer to the king by the name of the country. They referred to him as Denmark because he was the embodiment of everything that it meant to be Denmark. Lahavdil, in Chassidish communities, this is how they often refer to the Rebbes, not as the Rebbe of this community, but just as the community. They refer to him in this sort of shorthand. He's the Vishnitzer. Why don't they call him the Vishnitzer Rebbe? Because that's the idea. The community is embodied within him. He is the community. It sounds dismissive and even maybe borderline disrespectful, but it's actually quite the opposite. The concept is that the Rebbe is the embodiment of the people, and the people are contained and embodied within the leader. So when the king does the mitzvah, we could say, okay, well, I'm doing the mitzvah too because I am embedded in the identity of the king. So when we talk about how can I do the mitzvahs of the king, well, we can address that. But what about the other mitzvahs? Again, opportunity mitzvahs, mitzvahs that are only apply under certain circumstances, mitzvahs that apply in Eretz Yisrael, mitzvahs that apply to specific people in the Beis Hamikdash, and so on. How do we do all of these mitzvahs? So as we mentioned before, we have the opportunity to do them through the study. This, parenthetically, is one of the explanations the Rebbe gives for the campaign of learning Rambam, because the Rambam's 14 volumes is the only codification of all the mitzvahs of Torah, including mitzvahs that don't apply outside of the Beis Hamikdash, including the mitzvahs of the Beis Hamikdash. In the later codifiers, the Shulchan Aruch and so on, they don't talk about those laws, presumably because they felt, oh, the Rambam covered all of that. So we default to him. Therefore, when a person studies the Rambam, they touch every concept in Torah. It's look, Torah is vast. You can't touch everything. You can't get everything. So how are we supposed to get everywhere? So we say, well, you got to pick something. Well, if we study the Rambam, we touch every law. We may not delve deeply into it and understand it intensely, but we touch every law. And when we explain what is the necessity of all of these garments, it's explained in the Zohar. And it's understood to somebody who's willing to engage their intellect, a maskil. Now, the word maskil, commonly in the sort of vernacular of the community, represents a person with an academic understanding of Chassidus. We would describe him as a maskil. Now, sometimes, like anything, it could be used as a derogatory. He treats it purely like an academic subject and sort of forfeits the personal life directives and so on that it's intended to communicate. So, like anything, it can be a positive or a negative. You call someone a genius, you roll your eyes, and that genius now became a derogatory term. Or if you say it with reverence and awe, it becomes a positive. Clearly, in this circumstance, we're using it in the positive form, that it means that he has a deep understanding of the academic side of Chassidus. That since the nefesh, ruach, and neshama of the person, and again, just a quick recap, the nefesh is the basic sense of my existence. The ruach is my character. Sometimes we call it my emotions, but emotions, I think, is sometimes used to suggest a person who's sort of lost control of themselves and they're being all emotional. We use it somewhat as a disparaging term. And neshama is the capacity of intellect, the distinctive human ability not only to be trained, but to think and literally to go outside of my life experience, to be receptive to the infinite. Now, these three characteristics, which are described as the three aspects of the soul, remember there's 5 aspects, the other 2 are chaya, what I live for, and yechida, my absolute oneness with Hashem. These 3, as the Alter Rebbe describes way back in like chapter 3 of the book of the Intermediate Man in the beginning of Tanya, are the 3 that are encased within our human experience. The fact that I exist, when I do a mitzvah, I show that my existence is in alignment with Hashem. The fact that I have, again, this emotional, that's the word we're using, or I'm using, these character traits. So when I demonstrate my love for God, my reverence for God, I am aligning them with Hashem. And neshama, which is the distinctive human capacity for, again, intellect, not the accumulation of data, but for the capacity of wonder to go completely outside of my common life experience, the koach ma, the willingness to say what, and not just to say, oh, I know that one, I know that one, I know that one, and reduce everything into something that I already know. These are the three human experiences of the neshama. Chaya and Yechida are when we go outside of our human experience. That's when a person is willing to go for what we call Mesiras Nefesh, a total surrender of soul, because I live for something greater than myself. And Yechida, which is my absolute alignment with Hashem, that isn't about some behavior. But Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama is where sort of the focal point is, because it's encased within our human experience. And that's where we have the real struggle as well as the genuine impact. So hopefully you can sort of see where this is headed, because when we do mitzvahs, that's really when we contain or we direct the nefesh, ruach, and neshama. The chaya and yechida don't need as much direction. I mean, anything can be hijacked, and we can think that we live for our own physical survival. God forbid we ever have that circumstance where we have to choose between our physical survival and our spiritual survival. We could be duped into thinking that my physical survival is most important. In general, though, the process of mitzvahs access and align my nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Excuse me, my behavior, do this, eat matzah, shake the lulav, very behavior-oriented mitzvahs. My ruach, my emotional, love Hashem, love another Jew, revere God, again, very emotional side of mitzvahs. Again, not the word emotional, that's the word I'm using. And neshama, which is the capacity to imagine something outside of myself. That's where the mitzvahs really come into play, much more than in Chai Nichid. And in classic Hasidic terminology, which you have all heard so many times, is the idea that the mitzvahs is where the objective is fulfilled. The tainug, that alignment, is in the mitzvah execution more than it is in the spiritual. And that's why Hashem created human beings with the struggles in the human character, so that our execution of the human character mitzvahs creates this alignment with Hashem and this fulfillment of purpose. I'm sorry. Hey, bechinas nevroim. V'yefshel shum nivra lahastik shum asaga b'beir v'yetzer hakol. Ein seit baruch hu. So how can we, and again, this is that classic question, how can we, human beings, limited and all, have any aspiration to have an alignment with Hashem? It's only because of the gift that Hashem gives us, which is the opportunity for mitzvahs. The mitzvah opportunity is the bid that Hashem makes for connection with us. Because we, as human beings, limited creations, have no access to the infinite. I mean, just think about it in the most basic level. We are conscripted by terms like past, present, and future, here and there, time, space, and so on. How can we ever have any hope to be in alignment with, or even connected to, or even in any way related with the infinity of Hashem? Hashem is infinite. We are finite. No matter what we do, it's always going to be tagged, I almost said tainted, I don't know if that's a fair word, by our human limitation. And Hashem is infinite. So what is the opportunity? What's the bridge? That is the mitzvah observance. Even after Hashem makes himself known to us. And the Alter Rebbe here will sort of walk us through some of those stages of tzimtzum. Again, that idea that Hashem compresses himself, he restrains his expression of self, which, as you recall from the end of the Sefer Shalbenim, the Alter Rebbe describes, again, using human terms. But the idea is so we can have some degree of relating to it, is that Hashem puts in effort, we'll use that word, to compress himself into a physically accessible, humanly accessible character. But even so, how can we ever hope to have any connection? Again, and the answer is going to be mitzvahs. I mean, you probably sort of anticipated that. How can we ever have a hope to be in alignment with the infinity of Hashem? Only because Hashem offers it to us. This ties into an idea. It's not mentioned here in Tanya, but it's one you're probably familiar with that becomes further elucidated here. One of the mitzvahs is the prohibition of deleting or adding mitzvahs. Excuse me. You're not allowed to delete mitzvahs. And you're not allowed to add mitzvahs. Okay, delete mitzvahs is a little easier to understand why you're not allowed to delete a mitzvah. Because deleting a mitzvah, who asked you? It's Hashem's mitzvah, and it's not up to you to decide that this mitzvah is no longer relevant. Okay, we understand that. The question, though, becomes, why can't we add a mitzvah? Why can't we say, you know what, we're going to add a 614th mitzvah, whatever it's going to be? So amongst the many explanations, one is because that's missing the whole understanding of what a mitzvah is. If we think that a mitzvah is simply a very good idea for operating life and society, so then, lahavdil, just like the Constitution, we're not diminishing the intelligence and the foresight of the earliest writers, but things change, and therefore we have to come up with a better idea or a new idea that assures us something of substance in our functional society. But mitzvahs are not simply, or not even primarily, that's even the better word, about just the functionality of society. And that's why every once in a while you get a mitzvah that seems to be totally counterintuitive and even potentially contrary to what we would think of as running a, quote, healthy, reasonable society. And it makes us go, whoa, what's that? And we say, well, this reminds us that mitzvahs are designed to be an opportunity that Hashem has offered us. And therefore, our presumption that it's going to line up in nice, neat parallels of a certain sense of Western jurisprudence is toppled, because that's not its purpose, its primary purpose. It does that too. Yes, it's true that mitzvahs create a healthy society and a just society and a thriving society and so on. Yes, it does that too. That's not its primary purpose. Its primary purpose is to offer us pathways to be in alignment with the infinity of Hashem. That's what mitzvahs do. They offer us a connection point with the infinity of Hashem. Now, quote unquote, Hashem can do whatever he wants, obviously, but we are permitted to use human terminology. In order for Hashem to do this, in order for Hashem to execute this what's the word I'm looking for? This opportunity, he has to, again, Hashem doesn't have to do anything, but we're allowed to use those words. So it's important to have the disclaimer. He has to extraordinarily restrain the expression of his infinity. Because if he doesn't restrain the expression of his infinity, we run into two potential problems. One, our mitzvahs cease to be all that meaningful, because of course we're going to do the mitzvah. Nobody runs the stop sign when the policeman is standing right there. I mean, how foolish would you be? So our compliance wouldn't be as meaningful because there's overwhelming godliness, either because we're afraid we're going to get punished, or the reward is so obvious and immediate that we cease to be making a genuine free choice. Like the Rashi tells us in the beginning of the creation story, that Hashem's original thought was to create the world with immediate consequence, with din. But then Hashem saw that the world wouldn't be sustained, meaning we'd either be so obviously incentivized to be in compliance, or would be so frightful of being in contradiction that it wouldn't even be a real mitzvah. We'd just be following orders like a certain robotic, not dehumanized quality. In this process, if there's too much of a diminishment, then we become completely numb to the presence of godliness. So Hashem has to hit that perfect sweet spot. Every parent tries to do this. You want to give your children independence and you want to give them guidance. You want to hold their hand, but you don't want to strangle them. How do we make sure that we hit it exactly at the sweet spot? Okay, so we are imperfect. Hashem is perfect. So sometimes we give our children too much freedom and they feel abandoned, or sometimes we don't give them enough freedom and they feel smothered. Okay, we're working on it. But Hashem gives us this perfect quality. And this level is described with the analogy of hair. And we'll play out the analogy of hair as we go through in a few moments. So let's get back into the text itself, that we go through all of these tzimtzumim, which are very intense. And again, we're using human terms. They're very hard for Hashem to do. And again, using an analogy, the parent just wants to jump in and save the child. When you see them possibly writing the wrong answer on their homework, you want to swoop in and save them. But you know that if you do that, you haven't really done them a favor, because they're never going to learn math if you're there to rescue them from their mistakes. So Hashem goes through this very intense level, and that's why it's called Cyrus. Where do we find this term that it's described as hair? In Daniel, like it says in the book of Daniel, Visar Reshaha Ka'omar Naka, that the hairs of his head are as white as and clean hairs. Alpha became lo yochla hanefesh or ruach v'neshama limizbah la'ar hitovu masak or chulu. But even so, even after all of these tzimtzumim that bring it down to the level of hair, the nefesh and the ruach and the neshama are not able to tolerate it. Meaning, people say this, I just can't take it. Not in a bad way, it's just like I just can't. It's so overwhelming. It's so stimulating that it's a difficult thing, And again, hopefully everybody's experienced this at some level, this alignment with Hashem, that the person walks in and they just feel swept up and it overrides their intellect or their emotion or even their behavior. Sometimes it's a scary thing. And the people are like, well, I just want to go back to where I was. This is a little too much for me to be so overwhelmed by this swell of spiritual identity and so on. Like it says, that we should see the beauty of Hashem. But again, one of the challenges is, in order to see that, we have to bittul ourselves to that beauty, rather than say, oh, this is why I like it. I like the angles, I like the colors, I like the shape. To be totally surrendered to it. One illustration of this that may be helpful. Again, I'm not a museum person and I can't really describe the difference between great artwork and so on, but it's quite possible that a person could go to the greatest art museums and see the greatest pieces of art and not be all that overwhelmed. We've seen it so often, like there's an illustration that no one could ever steal the Mona Lisa, because how are you going to sell it? Everybody knows what it is, I mean, so you walk past these things and we see it. I've seen it 1,000 times and so on. It requires a certain degree of investigation and familiarity and so on. I mean, the same is true with our relationship with Hashem, especially at this time. We're coming up to spending a lot of time in shul, reading a lot of unfamiliar words and liturgy. And a person might feel a sense of like, what am I even saying here? I don't even know what I'm talking about. Well, if you'll put in some effort and you will pursue some study, maybe it will be more meaningful to you. But again, no deposit, no return. Don't anticipate that it's just going to jump off the page and overwhelm you. And this is that idea. Why the nefesh, ruach, and neshama aren't immediately overwhelmed by it. And if you've ever, which is probably everybody, been around someone who's extraordinarily excited about something, whether it's art or music or sports or something, and they can't figure out why everybody else isn't as overwhelmingly excited as they are, like this guy, but this is the greatest, and he's just all excited, and I'm like, okay, I don't get it. I'm happy for you that you're excited, but it doesn't resonate with me with any such intense sense of meaning. Um, the commercial of Lashon Imois, Va'arivois, Umasikois, V'tainik Otzum and Ketz. So here the Alter Rebbe lists out a series of synonymous adjectives to describe this kind of alignment with Hashem. Na'im, it's like beautiful. And Ariv, it's rich. And Matikos, it's sweet. And Tainuk Otzum, this intense sense of alignment. And again, hopefully people have had this type of experience where they just feel like this is like home. It just feels right to me. It feels natural. It feels like this is where I belong. And I can't put a descriptive on it. I can't explain it. I just feel like it's, or other times people say, I always just felt off there. This is what everybody said I should be doing. But I went there and I just felt off. It just didn't feel like it was right for me, but I thought it was me. Everybody else says this is the most exciting thing to do. This is the most wonderful thing to do. An example of this that I've encountered, just to illustrate this idea, is many Gerim, converts. They say, I just never felt like I should be where I was. I always felt like I didn't belong there. I always just felt like everybody else around me is enjoying this and I'm not. And what's wrong? And then I came to realize that my neshama is just not supposed to be here. This is not the place of my neshama. Hopefully, again, as we often talk about, every parent instills in their child, that sort of stranger danger that you should trust that intuition. Unfortunately, in our society, broader secular society tries to numb that and tell anybody that they're just being boring and a prude and so on, when they have a natural sense that this is not a right place to be. I shouldn't be here. This is not right. But they will tell them, oh, stop it. It's fine. And it's not so fun. Okay, so that's this level of connection with Hashem. Commercial Kosov, like the pasuk says, as tisaneg, and here's the emphatic word, al Hashem. Then you will have this, again, pleasure, alignment on Hashem, above, like to go above. What does that mean? So the Alter Rebbe describes that this is even more intense than the relationship. In the relationship, there's me and the other person. But here, there is a sort of form that is so innate that it raises me up to a higher level. So that is, when we say higher, we don't mean better, like I'm better at it than the other person is, but it's not just a learned character and behavior and so on. Rather, it's this sense that this is where I belong. That's that Yechida level. And again, hopefully everybody has had some experience in this manner. Maybe it's Yom Kippur when you say, this is where I need to be. I mean, hopefully the person comes to Kol Nidre, they don't think, maybe I should have stayed home and watched TV instead. I mean, you hope that that's not. That's what it means to know that you are to be there, to know that you are aligned with that place. Home is where they have to take you in, so to speak. It's where you're absolutely aligned. This is your safe space. This is your identity, and so on. So this is that level that we're talking about, where there's such a union with Hashem that it's not even me and Hashem. It's an absolute total oneness. And it's a rare thing that we ever touch it. And hopefully we do. I mean, hopefully we can all touch it. But it's an aspiration, and it's an aspiration of Hashem. Remember that visual that we talked about in Iggeres Tshuva, where the Tav Shin Vav Vez, and then that final Hey, which is the part of God that's entrusted to us. And if it's gone somewhere it doesn't belong, then it's like I made a birthday party and I invited all my friends, and they said, well, we don't like that ice cream, so we're not coming. But what do you mean? Don't you want to be aligned with me? It's not about, I don't go to my friend's wedding because I like the food. I don't go to my friend's wedding to listen to the music. I go there because I want to be in alignment with my friend. And if I'm in alignment with my friend, he's in alignment. And if I'm not there, he doesn't say, oh, good, more toys for me, more ice cream for me. I don't have to bother with that. I get to keep the present. No, there's something broken about me when I'm not in alignment with the infinity of my identity. Now, this is a little bit of an unusual word, which the Alter Rebbe throws in there. Tzachzuchos means like a passionate yearning, like this longing. The tzimtzum level, which again we've analogized to hair, which will develop a little bit more. That hair, as we know, you cut your hair, it doesn't feel any pain. Yet, I mean, science has given us this insight that your whole identity is contained in the DNA of your hair, and the idea being that the sense of your identity is so compressed that it doesn't even feel pain. And that's why sometimes we cherish hair, like the Nazir, and sometimes we don't like hair. And that's why the Metzora has to shave his head. Well, which one is it? Well, it depends who it is. It's an expression of self. If the person's in an unhealthy space, then even his hair is unhealthy. If a person's in a sanctified space, then even his hair is sanctified. And again, when we do the mitzvahs, sometimes it feels like the hair. It doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't have this sort of great intensive godliness that it emboldens me. It just feels pretty ordinary, pretty perfunctory, better. And yet we're saying that Hashem has embedded the infinity of his existence into these mitzvahs. And again, coming up to Yontif, sometimes that can happen. It feels a little bit like, another page and another page. I mean, it could be wearing, on our physical self. It could be wearing on our emotional self and on our intellectual self. So what keeps us going? To remember that this is about being in connection with Hashem. So again, sometimes this could happen in other relationships with your child, with your friend, with your neighbor. Sometimes they're trying because it's not that much fun to me. Playing Legos with your child is not always so much fun, but it's about the alignment that comes from it. Lashon sacha tsoma, and again, this word tzachzuchos means this like thirst, this like deep thirst. Not just I'm thirsty because my throat's a little parched. We're talking about a person, God forbid, on the cusp of total expiry. Hatzachzuchos shleitzi min atakav v'dispatim mitzuyusay kener ba'avuka im loish b'chinas orze atzmai tishtalshel v'timshach mimenu eza adam muetes b'derech hashtalshelis. Now, what would happen? The person has this longing, and the classic illustration of the two eldest sons of Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, that they had such a longing that they never came back. And again, it's not the longing that's the concern. The concern is they didn't come back. But that a person should have this sense of passion. And again, it's a rare thing. You say to people, they often ask these kids, what's your passion? I don't know. I'm 14. I'm just trying to make it through life. I don't know that I have a passion that I have decided and follow my dreams. I don't know what my dreams are. My dreams are right now to do my homework. But we make the argument that contained deep within every Jew is this passion to be in alignment with Hashem. We have a part of God that has been entrusted to us. Sometimes we take it away from that because we think we're going to find the alignment somewhere else because our animal soul is telling us that's where it is. And what is truly our alignment is our passion to be reinstated with the infinity of Hashem. But what will happen is it could forfeit its humanity, which might be somewhat desirous, but it's not the will of Hashem. The will of Hashem is to be in the physical container and executing the mitzvahs in that way. All right, stop here.